Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter.
Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of the CPG Guys featuring Peter and Sri. And I would like to remind all of you that you can find all our content on cpgguys.com, where you can find our weekly podcast, as well as a takeaway on a profitability series we did way back in October of 2020, as well as you can rate us on the Apple platform, as well as you can find us on 20 different podcast platforms. And we would love for you to take a second and go to ratethispodcast.com/CPGguys, because we'd love to hear from you what we got right, what we didn't get right, and what you'd like to hear from us. And we love seeing 5 stars in the sky. That always feels good, doesn't it, Peter? They look beautiful. I also want to remind our audience that starting early December of 2020, we started a new series called The 4, where every Monday when we release our episode with our guest, we talk about the latest newsworthy items, the top 4 of them in our CPG industry and retail from the previous week. Please do check it out. Let us know how it is. And you can find the complete video on IGTV and also on this podcast. We have a very special guest today, but prior to welcoming our special guest, I want to welcome, as always, week over week, episode over episode, longtime friend, a friend of the show, a friend of the industry, a data, analytics, loyalty, UGC, and ratings and reviews, and content expert. Welcome, Peter Bond.
The World Series champion Dodgers, that is, Sri. You're the Oprah to my Gale, the Orville to my Wilbur, the Jordan to my Pippen. We just go together, Sri. It's great to be here with you.
For a while there, we could have had a Saquon or we could have had a Daniel Jones, but looks like the promising run is coming to an end.
I would say so.
Russ, welcome to the show. So I'd love to introduce our guest today, the Director of E-commerce and Category Strategy for Target at Johnson & Johnson. And we'd love for you to give us a brief interview for what you do and what you do for Target and for J&J.
Yeah, well, guys, first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for starting out with some baseball stuff. I'm a huge baseball fan, been to all 30 stadiums. Sri, as you mentioned.
I've only been to 28.
Russ and I have been to a Yankees-Twins games together.
Yes, and of course the Yankees won because the Twins cannot beat the Yankees. So congrats on that, Sri. But as Sri mentioned, I'm on the J&J team on the Target account here in Minneapolis. I wear a few different hats, but e-commerce is the thread that ties everything together. So first, I have a team leading e-commerce, all of our e-commerce functionality with Target.com and mobile. That comes, all the way from fundamentals like PDP stuff to innovation like driving social commerce. I also have another team that is a team of category managers and insights partners dedicated to Target. And then I also get to expand some of my e-commerce horizons beyond Target as a member of J&J's digital acceleration team. So I'm a huge e-commerce passionate guy, so excited to talk with you guys today.
Awesome. And as Pedro would say, the Yankees are the Twins' daddy.
That's what he would say. Yes, he would.
So Russ, your career is very intriguing when I look through your different experiences. Traditionally, brand folks come with brand 101 and haven't really crossed any career spans with a retailer. You're actually quite the opposite. You've spent most of your career in retail. You worked for Target. You've been a buyer, which I think is extremely unique in this world of CPG and branding. And now you're actually on the manufacturer, aka vendor side. Can you tell us how different it is to be a buyer versus now being the one that needs to influence a buyer, and how differentiated the skill sets are in each role and other different motivations? And now more than ever, given e-commerce where bottom of the funnel has become supreme, those buyer skills have got to be really epic.
Yeah. I think as a buyer, you really go a mile wide and a foot deep. And I think when you're in a CPG customer facing team, it can be the inverse of that. ultimately, you know, I think at the end of the day, the focus needs to be on the consumer and the shopper, and that's what really brings everything together. And there truly is like a symbiotic relationship between the buying side and then the manufacturing side. Kind of like an Oreo cookie, right? Like, you know, you take the chocolate wafers, and those are all right, right? And then you think about the creamy, you know, vanilla stuff. That's good too, right? Like they make double stuff of it. It's really good, right? But if you have either of those on their own, it doesn't really work. So when you put the two together, that's where the magic happens, right? And that's where I think, you know, in my career anyway, having that buying history, having the CPG manufacturer side influence now has really unlocked a lot of value, I think, to both Target, J&J, and ultimately, you know, the guest at the end of the day.
Russ, welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to have an industry veteran join us to talk about the lovely role and relationship and collaboration between vendors and retailers. That's certainly been my experience as well. And knowing you're a Mets fan, which has a combination of both the good, the Dodgers, and the bad, the Giants in your color scheme, well, I'll at least give you 50% credit. I don't think that I need to tell you the pandemic we're all experiencing is having a profound effect on shopping behavior. Shri and I in previous episodes have referred to the tremendous growth that Target in particular has been experiencing in e-commerce. So given what is going on in the pandemic, I think and our audience in particular would love to hear what it is that you and your team are doing to make sure that Target is taking the most advantage and succeeding as best as possible from an e-commerce perspective during these challenging times.
Yeah. So obviously, you know, with the pandemic, shopper behavior has changed big time. You have all age ranges, you know, downloading apps, ordering online, doing pickup. And I would say the biggest thing that's probably driven Target's growth is drive up, which is you know, the click and collect, where curbside, as you might hear from other retailers. You know, in terms of like how we support that, one, we're leaning into the strategy by just having really great content health. It starts with the PDP. We were lucky enough to be awarded, J&J was the #1 content health scorecard across all Target vendors for 2019. So we were in a good place going into it. And then I'd say like we've really focused on driving promotions that really promote profitable e-commerce sales like curbside, like drive up, to really incent the guests to take advantage of that rather than try to ship products to people's homes, which is a lot more costly for the retailer. And then, you know, it comes right back to the CPG manufacturer in terms of JBP agreements.
Hey, Russ, you mentioned the content scorecard. I think we'd all agree that Target has led the retail industry in defining what specifically they're looking for from a content perspective. Can you give us like a little bit of what you and your team do when that content scorecard is issued to figure out how you not only maintain what you're doing, but actually improve upon it for the next scorecard issuance?
Yeah, Peter, you know, Target does a great job of really detailing out what all the opportunities are. So you can see kind of item by item what the issue is, if there is an issue. And then we really dig in and we figure out like, what can we get from our internal brand teams? And then if we can't get something, maybe there's a video that we can't get on certain brands or items, we get scrappy on our team. So there's a company called Story Express that went through a Target incubator that's able to create videos, kind of like a moving PowerPoint, if you will, but it's a way to create videos and really help inform the guest about, you know, product features. And it's something that we can create on our own team here. So that's been something that's really helped us kind of fill the gaps when we haven't been able to get something from our internal teams.
And just one last question. When you create those wonderful videos, is that going in the image carousel? Is it going below the fold, or both depending upon the product?
Yeah, it's above the fold, right into the carousel.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I think we all know that I've talked about this in prior episodes, all our research says the single most important part of the product page is that image carousel.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And we do everything we can to to really maximize that great real estate. You know, a content health scorecard is usually just going to tell you, check the box if you have the quantity, right? Do you have 5 images or more? It doesn't really speak to the quality. And I think that's next level of what we need to figure out. And that's where, you know, creating these videos or bringing in user generated content where we don't have lifestyle content from our internal teams has been really helpful, you know, to J&J.
Wonderful. Shri?
I did want to, move into your career at Target, but prior to asking that question, I am tempted to ask you, as we're discussing UGC and content, about ratings and reviews. Now, clearly there's a content scorecard you work with, you get it often, it's weekly, you can remedy based, it's actionable, things of that nature. We talked about image carousel, videos. What about ratings and reviews? Like how do you guys handle that? How often do you have to focus on it? Is it a priority in the first place?
Definitely a priority. People will not purchase products that have under 4 stars. So we try to make sure that we're digging in and understanding where there are opportunities. You know, if an item does have under 4 stars, what can we learn about that, right? Like, what can we take back to our internal teams and improve about, the products that we're offering, to consumers? But we also do a lot of syndication, right? So if people are leaving, reviews on our brand site, those are going out to our retail sites. And then sometimes we actually do some review seeding, especially for new item introductions. We'll actually work with some companies that have a good funnel to some target guests, and then we send them free products. It is, sponsored, ratings and reviews that are out there. So we are fully transparent with that, but we love to, make sure that we're launching with really strong, ratings and reviews right at launch.
And Russ, is there like a magic number that's appealing for a consumer? Is it 10 reviews, 50 reviews, or it's more the larger the better in general?
I think the larger the better to a certain point. I like to see over 50 reviews on Target.com. Obviously, if we're talking Amazon, it's probably a lot more than that.
If you end up seeing 10,000 reviews on the Converse, does that make you feel, hey, this is just way too big, there's something that doesn't feel right over here?
Yeah, personal opinion. Yeah, you do wonder what's happening there. Certainly, if you were to see that. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go back into your career as a buyer and at Target, right? So I think Peter and I are very clear that we recognize and know that Target started its omnichannel quest way back. It's not a new phenomenon or a new buzzword or something like that in the industry. And so I'd love to learn from you, when you were at Target, which has been 4 or 5 years now ago, was the omnichannel journey a priority? And if it was, what were you all specifically doing to evolve at Target, which was classically an in-store model? Was it all about click and collect, home delivery? To my knowledge, y'all were early back at Target, all spectrums of e-com. So just love to know how that evolved and, how it has become so elite at Target these days.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Trey. I think there were a lot of visionary leaders at Target that started the kind of omni-channel integration back in 2012. So before 2012, I was always at Target headquarters, but I was always on the store side of the business, if you will. In 2012, I moved over to Target.com in the digital business. And that's at the time when senior leaders decided that teams needed to be together. Merchandising teams needed to be together. Because before 2012, Target.com was in a separate building 5 blocks down the street on Nicollet Mall versus the store organization. And in 2012, the teams came together. So it's still separate P&Ls. But by just being co-located, being able to swing by people's cubes, making sure that you're in the same meetings together, talking to the vendors together, it really brought a lot of things, forward from an omni-channel perspective. I could give a quick example. When I moved to Target.com in 2012, I led the entertainment division. And we were selling prepaid cards. So, like Apple, iTunes cards, Starbucks cards. And at that point, we were actually selling them online, but we were actually mailing out the plastic, to people. And you can imagine in such a small margin business, all those extra steps and mailing and time wasn't very convenient, right? So, my team and I, we wanted to start this digital fulfillment of it. And unless we were co-located and really able to share like our vision and our strategy with the rest of the store team, I don't think we would have gotten the capital funding that we needed to be able to stand up this business, which is now a huge business, on Target.com and elsewhere, and very profitable too, just because the cost of fulfilling, those gift cards digitally is practically nothing. So that set the stage in terms of like just co-locating the teams. And then Target continued to move forward. And about 3 years ago, Target fully integrated the store teams and the digital teams so that buyers would own both sides of the business on that desk. And that has further pushed Target ahead, I think, in the e-commerce space, or in the omni space, I should say.
I think both Sri and I would argue that e-commerce is a balance between short and long-term objectives, not radically different than in-store model, a brick and mortar model. We'd love your thoughts on that and advice you have to merchandisers who are owning both, how they should balance the short and long-term objectives, particularly leveraging analytics and shopper insights.
Somewhere in there, Russ, I'd love to piggyback on that question and also ask, as a category leader at Target for a vendor, is the primary metric for you short-term, long-term, or a combination of both?
Yeah, so definitely both. I would say like a lot of companies focus a little bit more on the short term in terms of sales results, but I think in the e-commerce space, we have a little bit more leeway to change that vision to what we're building for the long term. And I know J&J has been very supportive to me in that. Peter, to go back to the original question, I think, merchandisers need to focus on consumers and what they need or want, whether it's short-term or long-term.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to make a short-term investment that can be painful to realize some long-term rewards, right? Like, in the e-commerce world, right? Over-investing, early on, even when the business is small, has led to great results for Target and for a lot of others in the e-commerce space right now. I think about that with private label, right? You're over-investing in shelf space and support, circular support when you launch a private label brand at a retailer to make a statement, to be able to build that brand so you get the long-term rewards there. And I also think about it actually in the D&I space, and I can kind of bring this to light just through an example of in my life. And I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and back in 2012, I saw that there was a need, for consumers to see more representation and inclusion, especially when it came to LGBT Pride Month. A lot of parades and different things like that. People want to show their support. And be seen. And I was on our ERG, our LGBT ERG, and basically sold in the idea of launching a Pride t-shirt and a Pride greeting card assortment, because I thought there was a bit of a miss. And I would say short-term wise, it was a little bit rough, right? Like we got some positive press, but there was a lot of really negative press. There were boycotts, against Target for investing in the LGBTQ plus community. Our call center when I was at Target got, over 10 times the amount of call volume of people upset, with Target's decision to launch this merchandise back in 2012. And it had never happened at that sort of a scale before. But there were a lot of really great leaders at Target who knew it was the right thing to do. It knew that it really, backed up the values of the company. And it was an investment. And if you look at where things have gone over the last few years, I don't know the size of the Pride business versus the Father's Day business in June, but Pride is big and everyone's taking advantage of it right now, right? So, and I do want to say, when I say taking advantage of it, that's probably the wrong word. Everyone's seen the opportunity of what consumers need and have been activating against that. But that's an example of where, we made a short-term decision when I was at Target that was kind of rough, but I think that's paid off over time.
Speaking of Pride and LGBTQA, you and I have both been diversity leaders in our quest, me on the Asian side, you on the LGBTQA side. I'd love to ask you what that personally means to you from a fulfillment perspective and taking others with you and opening doors for others. Anything you could share there, Russ, I think will be awesome for our audience. Also, I'd love to learn, do you feel the CPG industry has evolved well on the overall diversity journey?
It's some of the most rewarding stuff I've ever done in my career. I've continued in the Pride space at J&J with our Care with Pride program, which has launched with Listerine, OGX, Neutrogena. And I think the key there is not just launching products to sell products, it's launching products to give back to the community and invest in the community. You have to do it in a really authentic way. Otherwise, you get accused of rainbow washing, or for breast cancer, making something pink washing, right? So for me, it's all about trying to replicate the marketplace we live in and have people see themselves represented out there and have that choice, to purchase, what they need. In terms of like how, major companies are doing at D&I, that's a bigger question. I think there's a lot of opportunity that has been brought to light this year where there's a lot of companies missing the mark when it comes to D&I opportunities, especially with the Black and the brown community. But I would say from my learnings, I think you have to be really careful to make sure that you're doing it in the right way. It's authentic, it's really employee-led, and ERGs are being, really, counseled on for their advice and what is the right way to move forward for brands and retailers that are interested in getting into this space.
Thanks, Russ. That's actually very inspiring. We appreciate that feedback. I want to shift over to the term that is often used. Some consider it a word that should never be mentioned. Just yesterday, Shri and I were speaking with someone who said he never uses the word. So it's a bit controversial. Can you talk to us about what omnichannel means to you, and specifically what your team does to influence different consumer touch points on the spectrum of engaging with consumers?
Yeah, it kind of makes me laugh, right? The word keeps changing, whether it's omnichannel, digital, e-commerce, etc. It's kind of like Prince, right? Like Prince changed his name a million times.
The artist formerly known as.
The artist formerly known as, but whatever you want to call it, it's important, right? And it's legendary, right? So, to me, omnichannel, call it what you want. It just means frictionless, right? Like, how do you provide a consistent experience no matter what the channel is? I think it's as simple as that. But you call it what you want, but that's what we try to do. We try to make things frictionless.
So when you think about supporting Target so that a consumer, a guest, whether they're in a store or they're online, has access to the content on your products that accelerate the path to purchase and dissuades them from having to seek that content elsewhere, how specifically are you trying to make sure that works in Target's favor?
Yeah, I mean, tying it all back together, I think it's all about trying to make sure you have the right content that's consistent wherever that guest is, wherever that consumer is. So like this year, Neutrogena, which is a J&J brand, became the first brand to integrate with Target from a social commerce standpoint with Instagram checkout. Because we want to make sure, again, it's a consistent experience. We want to make sure the content is out there. And even if that guest isn't on Target.com or in a Target store and they're just kind of browsing in Instagram, how do we make sure that we're coming to life there? And it's, like I said, a consistent experience and try to convert, wherever the shopper is.
One last question before I hand it to Shri. And this is more of a prediction. There's, in the midst of the pandemic, there's pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. Where does this balance between in-store and e-commerce kind of settle out? Are we changed forever? Is there any going back to what it was before?
We're certainly changed forever, but people will come back to stores. We did see people come back to stores throughout the pandemic, and people want to come back to stores, right? I just think stores are going to be focused a little bit more on discovery, surprise, and delight, right? Like when you come to Costco, who doesn't love coming in and seeing that treasure hunt and all that newness and excitement when you first walk in the store? I think people miss that, right? If people are trying to be safe and they're not going into stores right now. So people will come back, but the experience that we will see in stores might be changed a bit. And I think a lot of like CPG companies that have kind of basic products that are basic replenishment products, I think over time, I'm not saying anytime soon, and this is just my opinion, I think the floor pad is going to shrink, for some of those products, because people will be more comfortable getting them online and getting them fulfilled maybe when they're visiting the store parking lot and they're coming into the store to do more of that surprise, delight, treasure hunt type stuff.
Excellent. Thank you.
Speaking of omnichannel and the store, no matter what the definition is, like you said, it's about frictionless commerce. I'm tempted to ask you, because what works best, at least from the learnings I've had over the course of my e-commerce journey, and I'm sure, Peter, you would conclude with me, is for a scaled brand, the best P&L friendly option perceived at the highest level is click and collect, which of course manifests itself in many names such as Click and Pay, BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store. Any opinion on that one? One of the things I fear in that space is, traditionally most brands have built a P&L based on basket behavior and being part of a shopping trip, a basket, pantry loading, etc., and then driving impulse in the process. Click and collect is the antithesis of driving a basket or impulse. How do you feel about that? And do you think it is the future of this frictionless commerce that we called Omni?
Yeah, there's a lot of things here. So one, click and collect is the future right now. It is the most profitable way to do e-commerce sales. I still think there's an opportunity to build a basket even with click and collect, understanding like more personalization and having more discovery happen in the process of checking out, right, for e-commerce sales, for click and collect sales. So at this point, with where profitability is, click and collect is where things need to go. I'm not so sure that will be the long-term future. When there's more automation and self-driving, cars are ubiquitous. We might see a renaissance in shipping to home just because the operational costs can come down a lot. So I think we just need to be ready and flexible and adaptable to see, where things go. But for right now, I would be all in on click and collect just from a profitability standpoint.
Yeah, I think Shri and I are of the same mind as you, that particularly in this country, with the exception of Manhattan, where you can pull up to a building and drop off 60 orders, that the cost structure of doing one-off deliveries and then spending 90% of the time driving from one drop-off location to the other to do a single drop-off is not economically feasible. So I think you're spot on there. My last question for you is, you were very fortunate in that you were at Target during a time when they were avant-garde in combining their in-store and their online merchandising activities. What advice do you have to contemporaries, be it on the retail side or even on the brand side, as the industry transforms in that direction? What kind of things should they be focused on to be successful?
I think, as you think about kind of like the omni-channel journey and what makes people successful, or at least in my case, what has made me successful, is really learning by doing, building empathy, immersing myself in the consumer shoes and the consumer experience. I learn a lot based on what I can do digitally with other industries, and I figure out how I can apply that to the business that I work on now. Case in point, I think with COVID, since it started, my husband and I have led a 100% digital life. We haven't had to swipe a credit card or do an analog purchase. And there's so many things I've learned, and so many people doing things so well. In terms of going to the gym, we used to go to a local gym. We discovered the Peloton app for fitness. It's unbelievable, right? Doing teledoc, for doctor needs, like the dermatologist. It was so yeah. Shri is flexing his muscles.
If you're watching the video, Shri is showing his. I don't know, Shri. I think your arm may be more pasty white than mine is, but in any event, sorry to take you off topic.
It's very distracting for me, especially, Shri. So
I can imagine.
Appreciate that. But teledoc, right, for doctor needs, like the dermatologist. And think about, like, how do you attach maybe some dermatologist recommended brands to that sort of experience? I think there'll be new partnerships in the future there. Even postable, right? We needed to send some greeting cards, could make it into the store. You can go to the site called Postable, write a great greeting card. It looks beautiful. It looks completely handwritten. They send it to your person, right? That you need to send a note to. So I think I learned by doing and really embracing, everything around you and figuring out how you could take those learnings from some other industries and apply it to your business.
Ross, discussing the diversity and inclusion journey earlier today, and generally giving your advice on the omnichannel journey, what advice would you have for folks who want to be part of the diversity and inclusion journey, perhaps as an ally, or be just part of the journey all the way and influence change in the industry?
Great question, Shri. I think first it comes down to listening, right? So learn, right? Don't just ask your team members who might be diverse how they would approach something. Do some research, Google some things, right? Like, have some knowledge so that you're not just relying on team members who fit a certain diversity bucket to kind of be your one-stop shop for everything that you want to learn in the D&I space. So do some research on your own, read some books. Then, I think it's really important to invest in talent, start a conversation, listen to that diverse talent, and see where there's opportunities for the company. Maybe it's internal stuff that needs to be addressed for employees, and maybe there's some external facing opportunities that are out there too. But chances are there's probably some of both. I think joining an ERG as an ally is something that I've appreciated for people throughout my career who've just wanted to help and be there for the cause. And sometimes just showing up is all that person needs to see, to know that you've got their back. They can bring their whole self to work and they can give you their very best. So that'd be my advice there.
Thank you so much for graciously answering that and also providing feedback on how folks could become part of the diversity and inclusion journey. For our audience, a reminder, you can find all our content on cpgguys.com. We would love for you, when you have a moment, to tell us how you feel about this show. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/cpgguys and leave us a rating and a review, and perhaps tell us what you'd like to see next. Russ, I want to thank you sincerely for joining us on this podcast today. And if people want to get in touch with you or get to know more about you, is LinkedIn the best way?
LinkedIn is the best way, and I don't always just accept random connections. So if you can mention that you heard me on the CPG Guys, that would be really helpful.
Awesome. Peter, as always, thank you for doing this with me week over week. It's a pleasure, sir.
It's nice to hear that the CPG Guys have some clout when it comes to getting Russ's attention. So, Russ, I'm looking forward to a late summer game at Target Field. Where we can watch a little baseball this summer coming up. God, we need it.
We do need it.
But thank you for joining us. This was a tremendous conversation. And Shri, thank you.
Thank you, folks. And we will close out this episode with a last reminder that in the month of November and December 2020, we ran an Instagram series on IGTV called One Question, One Answer, where Peter and I took upon several meaty and heated topics in the industry, and we try to answer them, at least our viewpoint, in less than 5 minutes. Do check it out. And with that, we will see you again soon next week. Thank you.